The Zilithian capital was dying. As the final rays of sunlight faded from the sky, the city's gleaming towers crumbled under relentless bombardment. Flames licked at the edges of the once great structures, casting eerie shadows over the broken streets below. Captain Lara Hayward stared out from the cockpit of her dropship, the controls firm in her hands. Her heart pounded in sync with the distant explosions, the weight of the mission pressing down on her shoulders. "Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Hale said from behind her, his voice tense. "The Council's forces are closing in. We have minutes, maybe." Lara didn't respond right away. Her eyes locked on the Zilithian stronghold, a massive structure of interwoven organic and metallic architecture, crumbling like a dying organism. The Galactic Council had deemed the Zilithians expendable, their pacifist ways no longer useful in a galaxy ruled by power. Now, the Council's enforcer, Zarvath, was leading the charge to finish what they'd started. "No one else is coming, are they?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a weight of resignation. Lara clenched her jaw. "No. We're it." The Galactic Council had turned its back on the Zilithians, and now the last vestige of hope for this alien race rested in the hands of a small human crew. The mission was simple: evacuate as many Zilithians as possible before the final wave of destruction arrived. But even Lara knew how slim the chances were. The dropship descended through a plume of smoke, skimming low over the decimated landscape. Below, Zilithian refugees huddled together, their pale, slender forms casting long shadows under the glow of the fires. Their large, obsidian eyes were wide with fear as they gazed skyward. Lara set the dropship down near the stronghold, its landing struts groaning under the uneven terrain. The hatch opened with a hiss, and Marcus was the first to step out, rifle at the ready. "Let's move," Lara ordered, following him into the chaos. Her boots hit the cracked ground with a thud, and the smell of burning metal and ozone filled her nostrils. She scanned the area, no sign of Council forces yet, but they were close. They pushed through the crowd of refugees, heading for the entrance of the stronghold. Inside they found Eronai, the Zilithian leader, his gaunt form hunched over a console. His skin had a translucent sheen, almost sickly in the dim light of the control room. He looked up as they approached, his black eyes reflecting despair. "Captain Hayward," he said, his voice a hollow echo. "You shouldn't have come. There is nothing left for us." "We're not leaving without you," Lara replied firmly. "There's still time to get you and your people out." Eronai shook his head, his hands trembling as they hovered over the console. "We are forsaken. The Council promised protection, and now we are abandoned." Lara's gaze softened, but her resolve hardened. "The Council may have given up on you, but we haven't. Humanity knows what it means to be abandoned, to be left behind. That's why we fight." Marcus glanced at Lara, his face betraying his doubt. "We need to move, Captain. Zarvath's forces will be here any minute." Eronai's eyes flicked between them, his despair battling with something deeper, a flicker of hope, perhaps. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. We will trust you." "Good," Lara said, stepping forward. "But we need to hurry." Just as she spoke, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The lights flickered, and a low rumble echoed through the walls. A voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've got incoming! Council mechs approaching from the south." Lara's pulse quickened. There was no time left. "Get everyone to the shuttles, now!" The refugees began to move, their quiet panic palpable. Lara, Marcus, and Eronai led the way toward the evacuation point. The distant thud of the approaching mechs grew louder, their heavy footsteps shaking the earth. Lara glanced over her shoulder at the horizon, where dark silhouettes were emerging through the smoke. "We'll hold them off as long as we can," she said, tightening her grip on her weapon. "But we're not leaving until every last one of you is safe." The sound of the mechs grew deafening as they drew closer. The first shots rang out, and Lara's world erupted in chaos. The thunder of approaching mechs reverberated through the air, a steady, pounding rhythm that matched Lara's heartbeat. The shuttles were still several hundred meters away, barely visible through the haze of smoke and debris. The refugees moved as quickly as they could, their frail bodies struggling to keep pace. In the distance, the jagged silhouettes of Council war machines loomed closer with each step. "Move faster!" Marcus shouted over the din, his voice strained with urgency. He fired off a quick burst from his rifle, the shots fizzling against the dense atmosphere, little more than a warning to the advancing mechs. Lara ran alongside Eronai, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had led these people into this hell, and she wasn't leaving until they were safe. But the odds were stacking against them faster than she'd anticipated. "Captain," Eronai said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. His tone carried both fear and resignation. "We can't outrun them." "We don't need to," Lara replied, her voice sharp. "We just need to hold them off long enough to get your people on the shuttles." Eronai looked at her, his dark, reflective eyes searching hers for a hint of hope. "And what about you? Your crew?" Lara glanced at Marcus, who was still laying down suppressive fire. She could see the determination etched into his features, but also the doubt creeping in. They were vastly outnumbered, and they all knew it. "We're not leaving anyone behind," Lara said, though she wasn't sure how much she believed her own words. "Not today!" A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. One of the mechs had fired, sending a massive blast into the ground just ahead of their position. The shockwave threw several refugees off their feet, dust and debris flying into the air. Lara's ears rang, and for a moment, the world around her became a muffled blur of chaos. "Captain? Captain, are you all right?" Marcus's voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. He pulled Lara to her feet, his grip firm. "I'm fine," she grunted, though her body ached from the impact. She wiped blood from a cut on her forehead and steadied herself. "We have to keep moving." As the group regained their footing, the mech army surged closer. Massive metallic constructs, each towering over the ruined landscape, their eyes glowing an ominous crimson. The lead mech, larger and more heavily armored than the others, was Zarvatha's personal machine, a symbol of the Council's unstoppable might. "We don't have time," Marcus yelled. "We need to fall back to the shuttles now, or they'll cut us down." Lara's mind raced. They couldn't hold off the mechs forever, and the refugees were still too far from safety. Desperation clawed at her as she realized they had no choice but to make a stand. "We'll slow them down here," she said, her voice grim. "Marcus, cover the rear. Eronai, get the rest of your people to the shuttles." Eronai hesitated, his hands trembling at his sides. "I won't leave you here to die. Not after what you've risked for us." Lara shook her head, her eyes hard. "We're not dying here. But if you don't get those people to the ships, then this is all for nothing. Go. Now." With a final, conflicted glance, Eronai nodded and hurried the remaining refugees toward the shuttles. Lara watched as they disappeared into the smoke, her heart sinking as the sound of heavy mech footsteps grew louder behind her. "Get ready," she said, her grip tightening on her rifle. "This is going to get ugly." The first mech opened fire, a barrage of plasma rounds lighting up the night. Lara and Marcus ducked behind the charred remains of a fallen building, the ground sizzling where the shots landed. The heat of the plasma seared the air, the smell of burnt ozone stinging Lara's nose. "We can't take them head on," Marcus shouted, firing back with little effect. "We need to find a weak spot." Lara's eyes scanned the machines, her mind racing for a strategy. Zarvatha's lead mech was the key, she knew. If they could take it down, the others might fall back, buying them the time they needed. "There!" Lara pointed to the underside of the lead mech's torso, where the armor plating seemed thinner. "Aim for that spot. It's our best chance." Marcus didn't hesitate. He adjusted his aim and fired, the shots pinging harmlessly off the mech's thick armor. But then, one shot struck true. A small explosion erupted from beneath the mech's chassis, causing it to stumble. For a fleeting moment, hope surged in Lara's chest. But the victory was short-lived. Zarvatha's mech regained its footing, its glowing eyes locking onto their position. "Fall back!" Lara screamed as the mech unleashed a devastating energy blast. The world erupted in blinding light, and everything went silent. The shuttles were so close, but the price of defiance was high. The world was a haze of swirling dust and smoke, the acrid smell of burnt metal and plasma heavy in the air. Laura struggled to her feet, blinking away the blinding afterimage left by the blast. Her head throbbed, and her ears rang from the explosion, but she was alive. That was more than she could say for the wreckage scattered around her. "Marcus?" Her voice was hoarse as she coughed, scanning the debris for any sign of her crew. Panic clutched at her chest. She stumbled forward, her vision clearing enough to make out a figure sprawled beneath a slab of rubble. "Marcus!" She reached him in a few desperate strides, adrenaline surging through her battered body. The sight of Marcus, half buried under debris, made her heart sink. His face was smeared with dirt, his helmet cracked, but his chest still rose and fell in shallow breaths. "Hold on, Marcus," she muttered, kneeling down and lifting the chunk of metal off him with a grunt. He groaned as she shifted the weight, but his eyes slowly fluttered open. "Captain!" His voice was barely a whisper, strained with pain. "I'm here. You're going to be fine," Laura said, though she wasn't sure if it was more for his reassurance or her own. She helped him sit up, careful not to worsen any unseen injuries. Marcus winced as he adjusted himself. "That blast took out half the field. Did they make it to the shuttles?" Lara's stomach twisted at the question. She had lost sight of Eronai and the refugees in the chaos. For all she knew, they could already be dead, caught in the crossfire of Zarvatha's advancing army. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain composed. "I don't know. But we can't stay here. The Mets will sweep through again." Marcus nodded, though his face was pale and lined with pain. "Then we better get moving." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the dust-choked air, a low, steady thrum that sent a chill down Lara's spine. The Mets weren't finished. Zarvatha's lead machine had survived, and it was closing in fast. They had little time. Lara's eyes darted across the wreckage, her mind racing for options. They were outgunned and outnumbered. Fighting the Mets head-on was suicide. But there was one chance, a desperate, last-ditch plan that might give them enough time to reach the shuttles. "We're going to disable Zarvatha's mech," she said, the words coming out before she had time to second-guess herself. Marcus's brow furrowed in disbelief, but she continued before he could argue. "It's damaged. We can target the weak point again, but this time, we need to get inside." "Inside?" Marcus coughed, shaking his head. "You want to infiltrate a council mech? That's insane." "Maybe," Laura admitted, her jaw tightening. "But it's our only shot. We need to take out Zarvath if we're going to give those refugees any chance of escape." Marcus looked at her, then out at the distant silhouette of the mech, its glowing red eyes cutting through the smoke. His hesitation melted away, replaced by a hardened resolve. "All right, Captain. Let's do it." With Marcus limping beside her, Laura led them toward the fallen building where they'd seen the weakness in the mech's armor. They kept low, using the debris as cover to avoid the mech's scanning gaze. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the machine moved closer, its towering form casting an eerie shadow over the battlefield. "We're almost there," Laura whispered, her voice tense. The exposed section of the mech's underside was just ahead, flickering with damaged circuitry. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and a deafening roar echoed across the battlefield. Zarvatha's mech had fired another round, sending a blast of energy into the remnants of a nearby building. Laura and Marcus ducked as debris rained down around them. "Go!" Laura shouted, pushing Marcus forward as they scrambled toward the exposed opening. They slid beneath the mech's massive legs, its hydraulic limbs whirring above them. The hum of the machine's core was deafening now, a rhythmic pulse that reverberated in their bones. Laura reached the exposed panel first, her hands moving swiftly as she pried open the damaged plating. Sparks flew, and the scent of burning metal filled the air, but she ignored it, focusing on the glowing core within. If they could just... A low, mechanical growl emanated from the mech. Zarvath had noticed them. "We're out of time," Marcus muttered, his voice tight with fear. Lara didn't hesitate. She reached into the exposed section, pulling out a fistful of tangled wires and cables. The mech shuddered, its movements faltering for a brief moment. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, the entire machine lurched forward, its massive frame crashing into the ground with a deafening thud. Dust and debris filled the air as the mech's systems whined in protest, its glowing eyes flickering and fading. Lara and Marcus lay in the rubble, breathing heavily, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had done it. Zarvatha's mech was disabled, for now. But as they pulled themselves to their feet, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Not mechanical this time. Flesh and blood. Council soldiers. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice grim. "We're not out of this yet." Lara's jaw clenched as she stared at the advancing figures. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. And now, the real fight was about to begin. The thud of approaching footsteps echoed louder, relentless and deliberate. Lara's pulse raced, her mind rapidly calculating their next move. She and Marcus had a few moments, maybe seconds, before the council soldiers were upon them. Their cover was blown, the mech neutralized but now useless as a shield. Sweat trickled down her brow, stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink. There was no time for fear, only for action. "We can't outrun them, not like this," Marcus murmured, his face pale beneath the grime. His leg was still injured, making escape impossible. Lara nodded, her mind flashing through possibilities. Fight? Against a trained squad, they stood little chance, especially with Marcus wounded. Surrender? The thought burned in her throat like acid. Surrender would mean death or worse. Zarvoth was not the type to offer mercy. No, there had to be another way. She caught a glimpse of a half-buried weapons crate, likely thrown from the mech's wreckage during the blast. A flash of hope surged through her. She dove toward it, pulling the heavy lid open. Inside were 2 pulse rifles, old models, but still functioning, and a handful of grenades. Not much, but enough to make a stand. "Here." Lara tossed one of the rifles to Marcus, then hefted the other in her hands. The weapon felt solid, comforting in its familiarity. She slid a grenade into her belt, her jaw tightening as the enemy's figures appeared through the dust. "We hold them here. We make them regret underestimating us." Marcus smirked, though pain flickered behind his eyes. "Let's give 'em hell, Captain." The soldiers, armored in sleek, dark uniforms, approached with grim precision. There were 6 of them, highly trained, heavily armed. Their helmets gleamed, reflecting the dim light from the still burning ruins of the mech. Lara's hands tightened around the rifle's grip. She had faced odds like this before, but never had the stakes felt so high. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about giving Eronai and their people a chance, a future. The first shot rang out like a thunderclap. Lara fired at the lead soldier, catching him square in the chest. His shield flickered briefly before collapsing under the concentrated blast, sending him sprawling to the ground. The others reacted instantly, firing back, the air sizzling with energy bolts. Lara and Marcus dove behind a crumbled wall, just in time as the blast scorched the ground where they had been standing. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, wincing as he fired blindly over the wall. "We're outnumbered, outgunned." "And yet," Lara snapped, leaning out to fire another shot, taking down a second soldier. "We're still breathing." The remaining soldiers fanned out, trying to flank them. Lara could see their strategy unfolding with ruthless efficiency. They were closing in, boxing them in with nowhere to retreat. The pulse rifle hummed in her hands as she fired again, forcing one of the soldiers to dive for cover. "We need to break their line," she said, her mind racing. "Force them to regroup." Marcus grunted, pain rippling through him. "I'm not exactly in running shape." Lara's eyes fell on the grenade at her waist. A risky idea formed in her mind, but it was their only shot. She unclipped the grenade, tossing it to Marcus with a sharp nod. "Cover me." Marcus's eyes widened. "You're not seriously." "I am," Lara cut him off. "Just trust me. We only get one chance at this." he sighed, shaking his head. You're a damn lunatic. Lara didn't deny it. She waited for Marcus to lean out and fire a few covering shots before she darted from behind the wall, moving fast and low. The soldiers immediately adjusted, aiming at her exposed form, but Marcus's fire kept them from locking onto her. She sprinted toward the left flank, her heart hammering in her chest. The grenade was already primed, ticking down as she hurled it with all her strength toward the cluster of soldiers. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave of heat and light. One of the soldiers was thrown into the air, his armor cracking like glass. The others were disoriented, momentarily off balance. It was all the opening they needed. Lara didn't slow down. She charged at the remaining soldiers, rifle blazing. She picked them off with brutal efficiency, every shot finding its mark. Their numbers thinned quickly, the once formidable squad now reduced to panicked individuals scrambling for cover. Within moments, it was over. The battlefield fell into a tense silence, the acrid smoke of the grenade still hanging in the air. Lara stood panting, her rifle raised, ready for another attack. But there was no movement, no sound except the crackle of the damaged mech in the distance. Marcus limped toward her, clutching his side but smiling through the pain. Not bad, Captain? Lara exhaled, lowering her weapon. She scanned the area, her instincts still alert for any sign of danger. But they had done it. They had stopped the soldiers, at least for now. We're not safe yet, she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion creeping into her bones. Zarvath will send more. We need to reach the shuttles before. Her words were cut off by the distant hum of engines. Lara's blood ran cold. She turned toward the horizon and saw it, a massive transport ship descending through the sky, flanked by smaller attack crafts. Zarvath wasn't just sending more soldiers. He was coming himself. Captain, Marcus breathed, staring at the sky. We can't fight that. Lara clenched her fists, determination flaring in her chest. No, she agreed. But we can delay them. Long enough for Eronai to escape. Her eyes hardened as she watched the ship grow closer. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about defiance. About showing Zarvath, and anyone else who doubted, that humanity would never back down, no matter the odds. Let's finish this, she said, her voice steady as the enemy drew near. They prepared for their final stand.